Ask 10 churches how they feel about their church management software, and you're likely to get 8 answers on some spectrum of how they hate it. I'm Rachel Barger, and before I came to Enable, I was a youth ministry assistant in a church. I'm joined today with Enable's Director of Consulting, Elliot Wood. Elliot spends most of his time helping churches in some phase of church management software lifecycle, choosing ChMS, optimizing ChMS, and training their staff to better use their ChMS. What are we talking about today, Elliot?
Well, today we're talking about why people hate their church management. And, in response to that, how do we define objectives for church management in relationship to ministry strategy? So, one of the things we always say is that church management is only useful to the degree that it supports our ministry and our ministry strategy and process. So, we want to make sure that everything's always aligned to the objectives of ministry strategy. And then, how do we align it? So how do we do that? How do we go about aligning church management so that it is working to fix problems that we have with church management strategy and just the ministry strategy of discipling people and caring for people?
So, what are some of the reasons why churches hate their ChMS?
So we hear from a bunch of people. Things that are frustrations. Sometimes it's just the friction of complicated steps, or maybe there's just too many steps. It takes 28 clicks, and we have to get the binder out every time we need to do a thing. Or people that just don't know how to do their job in the software. So, Rachel, you've worked in a church, and you know
Yes.
that a lot of times the training we get from one person to the person who takes their role is lucky if we get 15 minutes to go, hey, this is what I do on Monday morning in church
Yeah.
management. I take the attendance from Sunday, I put it into this report, I print it out, I put it in the folder.
Mhm.
So later on, as you're getting questions as a ministry assistant from your pastors, um, how can you give me a report on this? The answer is, well, I don't know how to do that, or maybe the version that comes is, I don't think the software does that, and it's often a training problem. um, UI designer, user interface, it's just hard to use. It doesn't make sense. We hear all the time it's not intuitive. And we'll go back to that previous one on training, right? Intuitiveness often really is a result of training. We're going to talk a lot about that today. um, Departments using something else. I
Mhm.
see this all the time. We've got spreadsheets, we've got different apps or tools or websites that we're using for things. So we don't trust church management because it's not the system of truth.
Mhm.
It's not where I can go to get it because I got to go to this Google spreadsheet or this Excel spreadsheet or, a post-it note to find the information I'm looking for. It's not in the system. Um, a lot of churches are stuck in old systems. They're
Mhm.
stuck in something that feels like, anyway, it was made in 1995 and it hasn't been updated since. But the way that really plays in is it's made for systems that are not being used. So I can't use it on my Apple. I can't use it on my phone. Um, I have to log into some convoluted remote desktop thing. So I can't use it in the rest of the world that I live in on a day-to-day basis, or when I'm not at the church. So I need something that I can use when I'm at Starbucks and bump into a member and we have a conversation, and I want to record that right then and there before I get back to the office and forget about it. Um, we're going to talk a little bit today about processes. Uh, there's no defined process. So process is the interface between ministry and how we use the tools that we use. And so if we don't have a clearly designed process that we're all using, that we're all following, then we end up with uh, data that doesn't make sense because we're using
Mhm.
it differently. Um, Sometimes the frustration is we have too much access to things. So we have too many options. And if you're, say, the senior pastor, and all you really want is to be able to look up people, their contact information, get a map to their house, and see what the last few contacts we've had, or maybe how deeply they're involved. Um, but you've got permissions to see everything, well, that's just too many levers. And it's not really your role to have to go learn how to use all of the levers of the software. You just need some kind of dashboardy things that make it easy to use. And if we can uh, take the software down and configure it in such a way that the average user has what they need, but not more than they need, then that's good. But we also want to make sure that they have what they need. If the permissions have been removed and they don't have the button because the church management administrator took that away from them, that can also be a source of friction. Uh, and one of the biggest problems I think we see is that nobody owns it. Nobody is the go-to person on it. It's just sort of out there. So we really need somebody who owns church management and owns training people, configuring people, and meeting with people on the staff to say, hey, what is the ministry problem you're trying to solve? What is the ministry task you're trying to do? And then be able to say, okay, let's see how might we make it work in the software.
Yeah, I know that all too well, and I think we see some common threads here.
Yeah. So some of these three areas that we generally see things fall into are it's the wrong software. Um, we're actually going to address that last, but the wrong software, it can't do what you need. It doesn't have the capabilities, or it can't do it the way you need to do it. Um,
Mhm.
or it's just way too hard to use. And depending on your church and the level of complexity in the church, just in the size and the ministry areas, maybe the software really is just too complex for the type of ministry that you're doing. Also, the wrong configurations. So we haven't configured the software to meet our ministry process. Um, that can look like a lot of things. That can look like you onboarded the software 10 years ago, and at the time you were a Sunday morning, Sunday school, Sunday evening discipleship class, Wednesday night supper format of church, right? And over the past 10 years, maybe you've shifted to a much more home fellowship group, service teams kind of model that's less of the formal church Sunday school class on campus kind of thing. And certainly a small pandemic for the past 2 years probably hasn't interrupted any of the way you're doing church, but maybe it has. Um, so the other thing is that you configured, say, 10 years ago on software that had a certain set of capabilities. And since then, it's grown and changed and maybe needs to be revisited to make sure you're able to use the new features and functions that the software company has added. So both of those things can influence whether your current configuration is right, and a lot of times that's influenced by not having that person that owns the software to go, oh, here's how we're going to configure it to meet our needs. Maybe you've got a lot of people configuring a lot of things in different ways, and it just doesn't make a lot of sense. Um, and then the last thing is just wrong training or no training. So, but a lot of times what we also see is that we've got the training in the software itself. Um, what does this button do? What does that button do? What is this field? But not necessarily in the way our church uses it. So if you're First Church and you are tracking, say, a new guest process, uh, that's a specific process to your church, and it's likely different from Second Church. And you'll want to make sure that your training goes through the way that you do it. But all of those things are problems with alignment with ministry strategy and process. They are things where, like a Jenga game, if you don't have the alignment, it collapses at some point. When the balance isn't there, it falls apart.
So there are several aspects of this alignment process, but how are they related?
Yeah. So I see the church uh, uh, management process as a life cycle, if you will. So it's a constant process of reviewing and evaluating, but it always starts with vision and strategy. These are
Mhm.
not technical questions. They have to be understood to make good decisions and implementations about your software choice. So the first thing we have to understand is what are we trying to do? from a ministry perspective. And at what points is it helpful for the software to
Hmm.
help us do that? One of the things we never want to do is use software for software's sake and try and have it disciple people. Software will not replace your discipleship relationships.
Yeah.
Um, but what it can do is if we're in a big church or if we're trying to make sure that we don't let people fall through the cracks, we can be more intentional about it. We can make sure that we're following through and that we're holding each other accountable. So we need to really understand what are the things that we're trying to hold each other accountable to do. Maybe that's making sure that our deacons or our elders or our Sunday school teachers are having an intentional touch point uh, with our members or with the people in their small groups, and that we're following through with people. Um, then we're gonna define those requirements. Those are functional requirements of tasks that the software does. And if we're in a phase where we feel like it's time to change or look at something else, those will feed into our proposal and help us to define what we're asking the software candidates to show us that they can do, and then give us some tools to evaluate the software. And then finally, those requirements help us to implement it. As we configure it, how do we make it do the things we said we need it to do on that requirements list? So we'll start to talk about each of these steps, starting with implementation and training questions, because I think most of the churches watching this probably already have a church management system in place, and we sort of always want to start with a perspective of, can we use what we have? Uh,
Hmm.
that question may get answered, no, we can't use what we have. But let's start with, do we have what we need? But also just recognize that this is a natural cycle and it gets changed due to leadership changes, needs in the community, software capabilities, staff shifts. So over time, it's important to keep looking at where you are in the process and what makes sense to revisit.
So, how can a church gain this alignment? What do they need to do?
Yeah, so let's start back again. What did we say earlier? We said let's start with the ministry strategy
Mhm.
and the ministry process. But I find it's really helpful to get agreement as a group on what are we trying to work for and what is the objective, and drill it down as clearly as we can. So we may end up with a series of projects, but the more we can get really focused on the objective for what we're working on right now into really hopefully one sentence. Now it can be a run-on sentence, but what are we really trying to do with our objective? We're trying to um, disciple people and
Mhm.
try and define what does that really mean here. Well, discipleship means growing in maturity with Jesus by serving one another, caring for one another, um, becoming more obedient to the life that Jesus has called us to. Uh, well, then how are we going to track that? What is it? What are the things that we're tracking in our church? Um, but then we need to look at who are our key sponsors and stakeholders. One of the big mistakes I see often, and I'll probably say this again later, is that the church management tech guru makes a bunch of assumptions about what the key sponsors and stakeholders in the organization need from the software, and they go do it, and they wonder, why doesn't anybody like what I did? And you want to go, did you step back and ask what they want from it? So those objectives really need to be defined by the ministry leaders and the ministry users that are doing the work uh, of discipleship. And as we're thinking about it, particularly if you're in a role of a church management guru or administrator, what do your clients see as success? Those ministry assistants, those ministry directors and pastors, what do they see as success if the software is doing what they need it to do?
So, once a church knows what the goal is, what would the first step be?
So I think at that point we really have to get clear on what we're solving. We're going to dig into that objective and what does success really look like. And I would say at this point, we're really trying to resist the urge to define the solutions. We're not trying to say, hey, this software, or that software, or this checkbox, or this form or something. But really, what is the ministry problem that we're trying to solve, and put a name to what would be the requirement of a solution. As a ministry assistant, I need to be able to see who is involved at this particular step in
Hmm.
our new to connected process. Um, then we can look at the current situation and how it has gaps. Are they configuration issues? Are they training issues? Are they capability or fit? Um, and then decide, do we have a search need, or do we have some training and configuration needs? And then, be careful of the requirements that don't really align to your objectives. Hey, is this something that actually helps us toward that objective of discipleship, or is it something that's kind of a bunny trail? I see sometimes churches that will. I'm going to give a bizarre example. What is a person's favorite Skittle flavor? And that's all fine and good, but if that's a requirement, is it really helping us to disciple people?
Yeah. Can we dig into that a little bit more?
Yeah. So I'm going to go back to this and say you might find a theme, involve those sponsors and stakeholders. They have to be in the question. And I was meeting with the church recently that one of the issues that the staff noted, the church management team noted, was they had been asked to build an app for a process, but they were
Mhm.
not allowed to talk to the actual people that would be executing that process. So they came up with some ideas and things, and it guess what? It didn't work for what the end users needed to do, and they're coming back going, "Hey, this doesn't do what we wanted." And so, well, yes, we
Yeah.
need to make sure that we're talking to each other about, well, what are you looking for? What is success for you? I really like to dig into a process at a whiteboard to map the current processes.
Mhm.
Uh, boxes and arrows, stick figure, Joe Guest walks through the door on a Sunday morning. Well, let's even back up. Joe Guest is driving down the road and starts to turn into the church. What happens first? Well, there's a parking lot team member that runs out and directs him to the new guest parking lot, and then make sure that as their family is walking in, they get directions to the children's ministry area and all that kind of stuff. Well, where do we get a piece of information for the first time? Well, as they check in their kids, or as they step up to our welcome desk, or whatever kind of thing it is. um, but then, as part of those arrows is, okay, well, what happens at that point? Well, they fill out a card, and that card gets put in Susie's mailbox on Monday morning, and she puts it into a spreadsheet, and she emails that spreadsheet to all the other people. And so a good point of friction is wherever we're stepping out into something other than church management.
Mhm.
Those are friction points. We're stepping into a spreadsheet or some other software. um, and then we say, well, where are we spending the most time doing something manual? Uh, whether it's emailing those spreadsheets back and forth, or writing it on paper, or making copies and putting it in mailboxes, any of those kind of things that we're spending a lot of time, those are areas that we're going to look at and go, hmm, uh, there's some struggle here that we need to address.
No, I think that's good. And that brings to my mind, like, what are the manual things we're doing that don't have to be hands-on and could be more on the technical side? Whereas filling out a card, putting it on so and so's desk, that could look like a workflow chart or scanning a QR code, right? I mean, it
Yeah,
could be
yeah.
that simple.
So perhaps, yeah, we could reduce some of that by, if we have a contact card that has, 5 interest checkbox. I'm interested in student
Mhm.
ministry. I'm interested in worship ministry. I'm interested in adult discipleship. That by checking those boxes or filling them out on a form on your phone, automatically routes that interest as a task in the system to the children's ministry director, or children's ministry admin, to follow up and invite that family into their ministry area. Um, so we start to look at questions. We're starting to kind of turn the
Mhm.
corner a little bit into the solutions standpoint of asking the question on these friction points, how might we? And we're converting those
Mhm.
questions, those friction points into a question.
Yeah. So converting the how might we keeps options open for multiple solutions, and it shifts from the friction point to like a positive side of like this problem can be solved.
Right. Exactly. And maybe helps to start get the creative juices flowing for how we might actually solve the problem. So
Mhm.
and what I really like to do at that point is take those how might we questions,
Mhm.
put them up on post-it notes. Like here, they need to be short enough to fit on a post-it. Um, it gives us focus and keeps us from trying to address 20 questions with one how might we. We have to limit that individual question to a single subject, and then we can kind of heat map them up on the whiteboard. We put all the how might we questions that kind of center around a certain type of problem
Mhm.
together, and then we kind of get a little bit of the angle that Rachel sees it kind of from this angle and Elliot sees it from this angle, but they really are very similar questions.
Yeah.
And then we can prioritize them using sticky dots or stars or something. I like to give people, two sticky dots and say you could put these sticky dots anywhere on the board you want. You can put both of them on one thing. You can put one of them on one thing and another one on another thing. Depending on what you're trying to do, you may use more sticky dots, but then you really get an idea from the group of what's the most important thing to start working on now, and then start to take that focus and go, okay, well, where really is the problem? Is it training? Is it configuration? Is it capabilities? It could be a combination of all three.
So if most of the problems are configurations, how can the church address those issues?
Yeah. So if we step back and go, well, we've got a good set of tools. Um,
Mhm.
can we reconfigure? The theme of the day: involve your stakeholders. um, what are the what are those pieces, and use those process diagrams and the how might we questions to
Mhm.
articulate a requirements list and prioritize it, and put them in what we call user stories. So a user story is just a way to say, hey, here's the thing it needs to do, as a what's the role of the person doing it. So as
Mhm.
a ministry coordinator, I can add a person to a list of people to follow up and assign that list to the person who's responsible to follow up. Might be an example of a user story. Um, but that question of the user story should be sort of, what does solved look like from a
Mhm.
from a standpoint of uh, the system is doing a thing that makes it solved. So solved might look like, and the person I assign it to can take notes and mark it done. Um, so then you're going to set some project scopes based on that priority. So as you're converting that to project scopes, you're going, hey, here are the things that are really important for the next run, and we're creating a roadmap. We're saying, hey, this next month we're really going to focus on, say, our new to connected process. How do we help somebody that just walked in the door go from I'm a stranger and I don't know anybody here to I'm plugged in and a member and feel like I belong in this community? Um, and you might even have to break it down into bits from there. Okay, well, what's the first step? How do we get people into our database so they're on our roadmap, or on our radar
Yeah.
in the beginning? Then, okay, how do we see who those people are that just visited us last week, and invite them to lunch with the pastor, or or a welcome class, or whatever you do for that. Take them brownies. People like it when people bring them brownies, so that's always a nice one. Um, and then tie to the training as follow-up. So again,
Mhm.
we talked earlier, and we'll talk more about training, but about those configurations have to connect to the training. The way you use the software has to connect to the training.
And so closely connected to the training is configuration. So the next thing would be training.
Yeah, exactly. So let's see how to train. So once you've configured your software, and this is an ongoing cycle. Once you've done that phase of here's our new to connected process or here's our volunteer management process, then you're going to want to tie your training to your implementation,
Hmm.
not just to the generic training of the software. So almost all your software products will have, some sort of knowledge base or some sort of training curriculum. Um, to me, that's a lot like, say, the manual that comes with a circular saw. Um, and I go down to Home Depot and I buy a circular saw and I'm going to build a new tool shed. Um, well, that's great. Now I know how to use the tool, the saw itself, but I need some blueprints or some designs for how I am going to build my work shed. I need to know more than just how to cut a piece of wood with that saw. I need to know a little bit of math and
Hmm.
how do I cut an angle and or measure the lumber. I'm not a carpenter, so I'm making stuff up here, right? But you get the point. I would need to know how to build the house, not just how to operate the saw. Um, and then I would say you want to make the curriculum and set a scope and sequence for each role and phase. One of the hardest things of training is that a lot of times we either try to cover way too much and teach everybody everything,
Hmm.
uh, or we try to be really brief and we don't cover enough. So, and then there's kind of three areas of training. There's that implementation, the kickoff, whether it's the kickoff of the software itself or the kickoff of just that process, which is the first time that everybody on staff gets it. Um, but then there's new hires and new roles. So we hire a new children's ministry coordinator. They've never seen the software before. Well, how do we train them on just
Yeah.
their role and their how to use the software in relationship to their role? And
Yeah.
then there's ongoing training. So just refreshing and helping people go. And um, I would build basically build a syllabus that says, you know, in our 100 class, here's a high level overview of the software and some general capabilities of it, just so people understand this is what it does,
Hmm.
and this is how we use it. And part of the goal there is to kind of prime the pump in people's minds so that when they're hitting a problem that they're trying to solve, they're kind of thinking, oh yeah, can church management do this? Maybe let me dig in to see, is that in the under the umbrella of church management? Then we might get into some more detail of basic operations. Well, how does the people and profile function work,
Hmm.
and just how do I do day-to-day steps of updating contact information and adding people to the database and taking attendance and things like that. And then you might get more specialized for some of your more power users. How do I create a process or a workflow? How do I create a new event or a registration or build a complex registration for something like VBS that has a lot of opportunities and different breakout groups and classes and things like that.
Yeah, and I think sometimes the configuration and trainings just aren't enough, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So sometimes you get to the point that you look at it and sometimes the software is old and obsolete.
Mhm.
Talked about, it's just not being developed anymore. You may have even received a notice from your current software provider that the version you're on has been discontinued and you have to get off.
Oh
um,
man,
you
that's
know,
a bad day.
that is a bad day. Usually they give you a good bit of notice on that, but sometimes there's just enough emotional and political baggage on the
Yeah.
staff that you're just not going to convince people that it really can work.
Mhm.
And so in some cases, just a reset may be what's needed. But in all those cases, we want to step back to those requirements and user stories that we developed earlier as a guide to our search. So we're going to use those to define what is it that a winning candidate needs to do. Um, and then we're going to write a request for proposal to describe those problems and tasks and jobs that we know the winning candidate needs to solve. We need to know they can. And we want to be really detailed. We want to be really precise and specific about what we mean by it. Now, no software is going to be able to meet all the needs. Um,
Mm.
So, at some point we're going to have some, you know, some trade-offs. But knowing what it is that we want out of the software before we start the search will really help us to evaluate the candidates based on their requirements, or excuse me, based on our requirements, not their features, if you will.
So, what are some key things a church needs to think about when they're evaluating a software?
Yeah, so we wouldn't really want to go deep on some of the key scenarios. So if you've
Mm.
got a particular way that you envision doing, say, discipleship follow-ups, maybe you, as I mentioned earlier, you have some shepherding process. Well, what does that look like, and
Mm.
how can you tie together what you envision that looking like so that the software candidate can describe to you how they could do that. What are the features and functions of their software that would support um, that requirement. Um, and it really does help to kind of map out some of those scenarios. A lot of times, it's scenarios that are very common would be, how do you deal with split families or unique family
Mhm.
situations? How can I make sure that the kids can belong to multiple households if mom and dad have divorced or
Yeah.
something like that, without having to create kids in multiple households twice? We don't like duplicate data at any point in the system. And so we don't want to have to create Johnny and mom's house and Johnny and dad's house and then, wonder why there's two Johnnies. So, um, we really want to consider some of the third party tools that might integrate. So
Mhm.
no software is going to do everything. So sometimes there's third party softwares, whether it's a facilities management application or mission trip management or other communications, text and email blasting tools that may integrate, that help meet your requirements while keeping a system of record where your data lives in one place and we have a single source of truth that we can trust. And then, consider training and professional service options that the candidate has. How are they going to help you move in? Or are there other options, like a consulting firm like Enable, that can help you with those training and professional services options to make sure that as you move into the software, it's successful. So even if it's a great tool and it's got all the things, but you don't have a good way to be training and implementing, will you be back in 18 months going, this software is horrible because we've got the training and professional services and the configuration and implementation problems messed up again?
Yeah. I was gonna ask, so how do you know when to go from, I guess, like who decides and who should be a part of evaluating that process? Do you oftentimes see the leadership team try to do it themselves and then get frustrated and reach out for help? Do they reach out for help first? What should happen?
Yeah, so I think I see it a lot of different ways. Sometimes there's a small group of people that'll start, you know, lobbying for some change, um, and then sometimes there can be, you know, kind of multiple sides that are arguing about whether to change. So I like to really start with a big funnel. Um,
Mhm.
that starts to get as much feedback early on from the broad staff, all of the users, and even if you have key volunteers and pseudo staff that are using the software, what are their pain points? What's hurting? Uh, what do they love about the software? Uh,
Mhm.
and what do they feel like is important? So that can start with a survey at the beginning, and then move toward that discovery process of whiteboarding with some of the subject matter experts, if you will, the people that are really living in the software. Typically your coordinators and administrators that are living in the software all day long, setting up their registrations and their events and tracking their attendances and making the reports for their leaders. At that point, the leadership needs to be involved, because they're often, whether it's department leaders or
Mhm.
department pastors, they're often setting the direction for what the the admins and coordinators are trying to do. So it's the department leader that is saying, "Hey, I need to know who are the people that have been involved in the past 8 months, but not the past
Mhm.
4 weeks," um, and trying to solve the problem of how do we help follow up with people that are maybe falling off um, the radar a little bit. Um, and so they've got to define some of those what's important to us questions, and then the more tactical users are needing to say, yeah, well, how does it have to work for me?
Mhm.
My pastor's not logging in every day doing this report. I am. And I'm having to export it and put it in a spreadsheet and pull this other piece of information from here and add those things. So
Mhm.
at that point, we're really looking to kind of break down the 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 process by kind of groups of people that work together on a certain type of function or in a certain department. Um, and then as you get to the evaluation phase, you're even drilling down to a smaller group of say 5 to 10 people that are you need somebody that can be the decider, the sponsor of the project that has the ability to make a decision and sign off on the budget.
Yeah.
And then you need enough voice from the people that are actually going to be using it in that evaluation phase that are able to say, yeah, this is going to work for us. This fits, um, and give feedback. But if you have 50 people or 250 people on a staff, at that point you really can't have every voice in the process, but you need a cross section. And then even further as you go deeply uh, after that kind of initial demo presentation or proposal presentation, and you follow up on some of those key scenarios, you might even have some smaller subgroups of people, that are working on it. You might have like the children's ministry staff
Mhm.
getting around it with the salesperson to go, okay, tell me more about children's ministry check-in and how exactly does that work? How do we create our events? How do we create our labels? What's that experience going to be at the kiosk for our volunteer? um, and you may even spend a couple of hours alone just on that one subject with the 2 or 3 people that are really involved in it.
Thank you, Elliot. I know that was super helpful information. Having gone through some CHMS changes myself working in the church, this is all very helpful, very practical steps to follow, and really does help one to know when to make changes or when to schedule a training to better understand your software. You guys, if you have any questions, you want any more information about church management software, consulting, please reach out to us at info@enable.email, and feel free to check us out on our website. Thank you, Elliot.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel.